Chris Diamond. Thanks, Angil. My name is Chris Diamond. I'm a contractor with the Alberta Medical Association, and I've been working on the CII-CPAR project for a little over the last 3 years. And today I'm happy to be able to present to you some information about using Accuro EMR for community information integration and the Central Patient Attachment Registry, or CII-CPAR. Just a quick couple of housekeeping items. I'm happy to introduce my colleagues, Angil Heitzman, Barb McCaffrey, and Sheena George, who are also on the call. Barb and Angil are monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat area, and we'll do our best to address any questions or thoughts or concerns you might have. We're recording. Hopefully that we'll be able to play this later for other people. So just want to make sure that everybody's aware. I'm sure you saw the notice there. And before I get started, I might as well address the elephant in the room, because I think everyone probably wants to know when is Accuro going to be ready, and when can we start moving forward with CII-CPAR and Accuro? So we had some pretty good news this morning. We heard from the team working on the technical issues that the things that have been kind of slowing down our test sites, a number of them have been fixed already, and the ones that are still outstanding should be fixed by the end of the month. So we are cautiously optimistic, but that by mid next month, we'll be able to start moving through our backlog of Accuro clinics and moving them forwards to onboard in the next month or so. So that's quite good news. All of the things I'm going to show you today are available on our website. So all of the slides in my presentation, as well as a number of other important pieces of information, are available on our website. Barb's has kindly entered a number of links into the group chat. So you can see there links to things, but I just want to perform a death-defying feat and exit my presentation for a second and just actually show you where you can go to find this information. So if you go to the ACT website, which is actt.albertadoctors.org, and on the page, hover over Patient's Medical Home, you'll see a link here for CII-CPAR. If you click there, it takes you to the CII-CPAR main page, and then there are primary care tools and resources, and also practice facilitator tools and resources. You might want to favorite one of these, because there's a ton of information here about the project and about using your EMR for the project. I've clicked on to tools and resources, and I'm scrolling down here to the EMR guides and mapping section. You can see that there's a user guide here for QHR Accuro and a mapping guide. These are both relatively recently updated and very worthwhile having a look for. You'll see that I reference them a number of times through the presentation. Now, if I can put this back in presentation mode, we'll be in business. Fantastic. So I want to start out by talking about the things that are done in Accuro EMR to set up for CII-CPAR when you first start going. And these are things that you do once to set up the EMR, and then once they're done, you don't need to worry about them again. So for CII, Community Information Integration, for those providers who are sharing encounters, you would do a little setup for them. There's some mapping of form types so that CII knows that these particular forms are appropriate to share, and the same with referrals, so that CII knows which referrals are the ones that it needs to pull to put into the Community Encounter Digest. And one other thing, for those providers who are sharing consult reports, you would also set them up as well. And detailed instructions about how to do this are in the user guide, which is again available on our website. If providers are submitting encounter information, it's important to know exactly what constitutes a valid chart item for submission. So one of the key things is that items are associated with a valid appointment. There does need to be an appointment in Accuro in order for it to know that there's information to share. the information needs to have an owner or needs to be associated with a provider in the schedule. And the provider, of course, needs to be active. And one of the key things to understand about Accuro is that, unlike some other EMRs, it doesn't have a function in it where you declare that the encounter is finished. In some EMRs, you click a button and that the encounter is closed. Accuro doesn't have that. And so in lieu of that, the program will look at things that have happened in the chart within 48 hours of the appointment and assume that they belong to the appointment and include them. So if things are happening within that 48-hour window, then Accuro will pull them and share them to Netcare. If they're outside of that window, then they will not be shared. For participation in the Central Patient Attachment Registry, there's a little bit of configuration there as well. Those providers who are participating in CII-CPAR get panel numbers, and those panel numbers will need to be input into the EMR. That's done on a provider basis, and that's how Accuro knows to share the panels. If there's a panel number there, then it will go ahead and share panels. One other thing that's important that you'll have to do on a one-time basis only is to look at the statuses that are configured in the EMR, and you'll see a new checkbox here that you can use to say whether this panel is appropriate for CII-CPAR or not. So in this instance, if a patient status is active, it's checked off here that they are appropriate to include in the panel or active on panel, as it says here. And of course, if they're inactive, then that would be inappropriate and the status box is unchecked. There are also some rules about panel submission for CII-CPAR or for CIPAR. The provider has to have a panel number, as I mentioned, and there also has to be a PRAC ID there. And then patients have to be attached to the provider, meaning that the patient needs to have their primary provider indicated in the office provider field. Patient status is active, like I just showed, and patients have to have a last visit date and a last validation date. So there's no restriction on how old those dates might be, but if there is no last visit date or no validation date, then the patient will not be included in the panel for CIPAR purposes. So just a quick look at the information that the EMR is looking for CIPAR. We've got some obvious information: the first name, last name, date of birth, gender. Like I mentioned, the physician must be indicated in the office provider field. There has to be a last verification date. And then the last visit date I mentioned, it pulls that from the scheduler. So hopefully you've all seen the Community Encounter Digest before. I hope that a number of you attended last week's presentation. So this next slide will look familiar to you. This is the Community Encounter Digest, and this is where information flows to from the EMR for encounters from Accuro. And there are a number of sections. There's a section at the top that just shows the encounters, what the encounter was for, and what the assessment was at the encounter. There's a health concern section where new problems are recorded, an allergy section for new allergies, observations that records a few vitals, and a section that records new referrals, and finally an immunization section. And I'm going to go through and show you where each of the fields are for these things in Accuro EMR. Hopefully you've seen this as well. This is the list of all of the data elements that are pulled for CII and CIPAR. The ones in green are ones that are included in Netcare, and the ones in white are items that are just sent to the healthcare data repository. This list is available as a slide in the orientation presentation that Barb put up the link to, if you want to see it and go through it in detail. So now I want to go through the mapping, and just before I do that, I want to note that you'll see items that are highlighted in blue, items that are highlighted in yellow, and items that are highlighted in orange. We've already seen some items highlighted in orange. Those are items that go to the Central Patient Attachment Registry. Items that are highlighted in yellow are information that goes just to the healthcare data repository. And I'm going to focus primarily on items that are highlighted in blue, because those are the items that actually show up in Netcare. And we'll talk about which fields they come from and then hopefully we can see where they show up in the CED towards the end. So first, what I want to highlight here, you can see that the facility number does not go to Netcare, but does go to the healthcare data repository. But pulling from the facility field here, the name of the facility will go to Netcare to indicate where appointments happened. The reason for the appointment shows up also in the CED, and it comes from this field here. In a number of the EMRs, this is a free text field. In Accuro, it's not. So you choose from the dropdown, which is good and bad. So you don't have to worry about free text that's showing up in Netcare. That's not appropriate. But sometimes the dropdown list is not as complete as it could be. But that's a limitation of the project, and that's fine. Just to know that whatever's chosen in this field will show up in the CED in Netcare. Appointment date and time come from the appointment, of course. And then diagnostic codes are actually pulled from the claims section of the EMR. Patient information comes from demographics, of course, last name, first name, birth date. Status goes to healthcare data repository, and of course also shared with CII-CPAR. Patient postal code is shared to the data repository for analytics. And we can see here that the patient EULI is highlighted in yellow. It also is shared with CII-CPAR for patient identification purposes. Provider information as well, first name, last name, the provider type, and the provider specialty code are both show up in the Community Encounter Digest, and we'll see that in a minute. This is, again, is data that maps to CII-CPAR. We had a look at this already. Nothing new here. Here, I just wanted to highlight that this is the field in demographics where you click in order to verify the patient. And like I mentioned, it's important that there be a verification date. Ideally, patients are verified on every visit. But there must be at least some verification date here. If it's blank, a patient's not included in the CII-CPAR panel. And you can see here it pulls the last visit date from the appointment list and is pulling the visit date of the last appointment. I see a question in the chat from Bazira, who says, I have a couple of physicians who are interested in CII-CPAR, but curious why the service code is shared in the healthcare data repository. It's for analytics purposes, Bazira. Really, most importantly, is because in the healthcare data repository, the billing data doesn't automatically go to the healthcare data repository. So it's nice to have, along with those diagnostic codes, it'll be good for analytics purposes to have service codes there as well. I hope that helps answer the question. You can see that there's some very basic vitals information that is shared to the CED. So in labs, blood pressure, height, weight, and waist circumference are pulled from there. For the allergy section of the CED, it's really just recording what is the allergen. It doesn't, and it's possible allergens. It's not smart enough to know whether it's confirmed or suspected. It just knows that if something is put in this field during the visit, then it'll include it in the CED. I mentioned earlier that diagnosis codes are also included in the CED, and here's where they come from the claims area of the EMR. And then below that, you can see information about health concerns. So if a new problem, say like diabetes here in this example, if a new problem is identified during the encounter, it shows up in the health concern section of the CED, and we'll have a look at that in a sec. Here you can see, this is important to note that the CED doesn't show surgical information, but if a patient has a procedure of some sort, that information is shared to the healthcare data repository. And here are the fields that it comes from in the past surgical history past medical history area of the EMR. And same with lab recs. The healthcare data repository gets basic information about whether a lab rec was done or not. It doesn't know specifically which labs were requested. You can see the immunization information here. It includes vaccine and the lot number, and it's actually the date that the vaccine was given here. It's indicated the lot expiry date. That's incorrect. It should be the date that the vaccine was given. If there's a referral during the appointment, it'll pull information about the referral from here in order to indicate that on the CED that a referral was made. And again, it's very basic information. It says that there was a referral to whatever specialty and it was done on this date. So this might be a little bit difficult to see, but hopefully you can make it out. And you can see where in the CED each of these pieces of information comes from. So with the service location, provider name, the reason for the encounter, etc., the health concern. Immunizations would show up here. Information about consults, provider name, allergies, etc. Hopefully this makes some sense. I've shown you this already, but I'm just going to hammer on my point. This information is available on our website in the mapping document and the user guide in a lot more detail than I'm able to go into here. So I think definitely worth your while if you're an Accuro user moving towards CII-CPAR. Make your way to our website and download the guides and the mapping and familiarize yourself. None of it's super complicated and all great information to have. So for the last part of the presentation, I'm just going to talk a little bit about confidentiality, because everyone's always concerned about information sharing and confidentiality in the EMR. And there's a number of options in Accuro for keeping things confidential as you see patients. So if a patient is, and actually I should preface this by saying that most of the patients that we've heard from actually think that this kind of information sharing is already happening, and they're often surprised to find that it's not. So there aren't very many patients who are concerned about sharing information, but probably every doctor has one or two that are security sensitive, and so worthwhile knowing what their options are. So if a patient if you want to not share information at all for a patient, Accuro gives you that option, and in the patient's demographics, in the other tab, there's a new field that says, do not share EMR or consult data with CII-CPAR, and there's a checkbox. So you can check that checkbox, and that will prevent information from flowing about this patient to Netcare. If this is checked, no information about this patient will go. You can also just share or just make patient information confidential on a per appointment basis. That's done in the appointment. You can right click on the appointment and choose out of the drop-down menu, do not share EMR or consult data with CII-CPAR. And that's strictly for that appointment. It doesn't limit information from other encounters that the patient might have. Another way to limit what goes for physicians that are doing consult type work, in order for a consult report to flow to Netcare, it actually must have the type consult report. So anything recorded under another type will not go. So if there's a confidentiality issue there, it can be recorded as a type other than consult report. The way that the system is set up, if you're registered to share consult reports and you do a consult report type letter, it's going to go to Netcare. There's also another option if the consult report is done outside of an appointment, when the physician or team member is choosing to fax the letter, there's a new dialog box that pops up with this "do not share with CII-CPAR." So for those types of consults, there's an extra box here to say, "Don't share this one, please." And that will give the option to keep that one confidential. One nice thing that Accuro has built for teams to use is the ability to look at panels before they're submitted. So Accuro will automatically submit physician panels on the 12th of the month and send them to the Central Patient Attachment Registry. So anytime before the 12th, a team member or the physician themselves can go into Accuro and from the start menu, choose Submit CII-CPAR Panels. And then you'll have the opportunity to choose which panel you want to look at. And then you get a window down below here showing you panel data for that panel as Accuro sees it, so that you can review the panel and see if it looks right, are the right patients on there. And Accuro's even got an extra step to show you patients that they've included and patients that have been ignored. So there's a bit of an algorithm that will find some patients that look like maybe they should be included, but they're being ignored for some reason, and you can see them in the list. And it'll also show you duplicate patient data. Detailed information about this, again, is available in the user guide. And finally, I just want to say a quick word about e-notifications. E-notifications are coming later on for Accuro. Unfortunately, they're a little bit farther away for Accuro users because they started later when it came to developing for CII-CPAR. But eventually they'll be available, we hope, by the end of the year. And an e-notification notifies a provider in their EMR when one of their patients has attended an emergency room, has had an inpatient admission or discharge, or have had a day surgery. They come in and they look similar to lab reports in the EMR. They're delivered twice a day, and they're there in the inbox for the providers when they, so that they can see that their patient has had an event at an Alberta Health Services facility. You can see that it includes just some basic information. It's who is the patient, where did it happen and when, who was the provider that they saw, and what was the admission reason. It doesn't include things like a discharge summary or detailed information about what care the patient received. The idea is if the physician or team member is concerned, they can check on Netcare to get more information. One other thing to note is that if the patient's paneled in CPAR to more than one provider, both providers will receive the e-notification, and as it's noted here in the e-notification as well. So that's everything I had to present on using Accuro for CII-CPAR. I just want to open it up for questions, and please feel free to come off mute if you want to just ask your question, or you can use the chat box if you want to fire a question into chat. Okay, not hearing or seeing anything. I'll let you all go, and thank you very much for taking the time to attend today. One last plug for our websites. There's a ton of information there. And if you have questions, that's a great place to find answers. So the bottom website here is the ACT website. There's also a fair amount of information on the Alberta Netcare site, and you can see the address there. Thanks everybody for participating, and have a great day.